friends, buying your seeds and getting the right varieties is actually a pretty important decision when it comes to how well and how your garden will grow and how successful it will ultimately be. Making sure we have the right varieties that are right for the area where you live, as well as the spaces that you have to put them, makes all the difference in the world when it comes to how productive that garden is going to be, and ultimately how much payback you're going to get from it. So even though it's a very important decision, sometimes it can feel a little bit overwhelming because there are so many choices out there. There's of course all the local places and all the catalogs and all these different companies, and there's just hundreds of varieties, it seems like, to choose from. How do we know which ones are right for us, and how do we make sure that we're getting the right variety for where we live? So if this is you and it's something you're having a problem with, hopefully I can help you, maybe clear that up a little bit and help you to get the right seeds for your garden, so that you can have the best results possible. So the first thing I would do is just make a list. It doesn't necessarily have to be written down, but it can be at least mental. Make a list of the goals that you're trying to achieve with your garden, as well as any special considerations that you should probably consider, of course, when you're gardening. Some examples of things would be if you want to just grow interesting varieties, if you just want to grow new and different things that are really different than anything anybody else has in the area or whatnot, or if you just want to try to grow maybe the older types of varieties, preserving the old school kind of stuff going, or if you want to be as self-sufficient as possible and you want to grow varieties that you can save the seeds from, or if you just have a goal of growing as much as possible. There are a lot of different goals that you can have. That's obviously not an exhaustive list, so just kind of think about it and see what it is exactly you're really trying to achieve with your garden. And then some other considerations that you would maybe want to add to that would be, how much space do you have? Do you have only a very limited amount of space? Or do you have a lot of space? Do you have a short growing season? Or do you have a nice long growing season? Do you have only containers that you have? Maybe an apartment dweller, someone living in a townhouse or something like that that has very, very limited amounts of space and can only grow in containers. How hot or cold does it get where you live? Is it something that you would need to be heat tolerant or cold tolerant, or both? As well as how much precipitation you get. Do you live in a really dry area? Do you live in a really wet area? These types of things. So once you get everything all organized, all your goals that you want to achieve with this, and all the special considerations that you would need given the living situation that you have, and the area of the country where you live, or the area of the world really, this all will help you have some direction as far as how to choose the seeds that you really need for you and for your area. The second thing, once you've figured out what it is that you want in this whole thing, is to decide where you're going to buy your seeds from. And there are two main sources. There are the local stores, and then there are the catalogs. And they're all competing for our business. It was a couple weeks before, the middle of December, and I was already getting seed catalogs. It's not even officially winter yet, and I'm already getting seed catalogs in the mail. And with good reason, actually. The winter time is actually the best time to plan your garden. So, make good use of the time while you can. The only difference I've really noticed between the local seeds and the garden catalogs, okay, the local stuff tends to have the most common varieties and the most sought after types of things to grow. And then the catalogs tend to have all of those common things as well as some less common things in addition to that. So which of the two is best? Well, it depends. If you're going back to your goals again, if your goal is to have the most interesting varieties possible, then the local seeds are probably not going to be what's best for you. If your goal is to just grow as much food as possible, then there's probably a lot of varieties in the local stores that will suit your needs just fine. As far as price goes, I found that the catalogs seem to be a little more expensive than the local prices, especially when you consider the shipping and handling. I have noticed that the prices themselves are higher, and then the shipping and handling is additional, cost on top of that. So, as far as planting a frugal garden goes, I would definitely say that probably the local seeds are maybe a little bit better of a bet. I'm not saying I don't like the catalogs, don't get me wrong. I just do a little bit of a combination between the two. What I do for my garden is, when I make a list of all the stuff I want to grow, I go to the local stores and find everything that I can there. And then whatever I can't find, I'll go through the catalogs just for those specific items and seek those out separately, if that makes any sense. So if your goal is just to grow butternut squash, obviously the local stores can have that. If you have something specific and different you want to grow, say you want to grow yellow or white strawberries or something like that, then obviously you would have to go through the catalogs, for that. And there are lots of them that come in the mail. I mean, geez, Gurney's, Burgess, Gardens Alive, Henry Fields, Johnny Seed, all of this just adds to the whole overwhelming effect. So, yeah, I would just maybe look through them and see if each one has what it is that you're looking for on that list, like I just mentioned, of the things that you wanted to grow, and then find, maybe one or two or whatever, that have the stuff that you want that you couldn't find locally, and then, get those that way. Kind of bundle them together so that the shipping and handling doesn't end up being overwhelming. That way we can keep it within, budget and everything. Okay, some other considerations to consider would be, like, for example, here are two types of squashes. This one is a yellow squash, this one is a butternut squash. Well, this one is 75 days to maturity, this one is 100 days to maturity. Now, it's not just a variety type thing. It's not like all spaghetti squashes are going to take this long and all butternut squashes are going to take this long. When I was actually shopping for seeds for butternut squashes last year, I found one that took 105 days to mature and another one that took 75 days to mature. I mean, the other variety would have taken a whole month longer before we ended up getting fruit than this one. So obviously I didn't buy that one, I bought this one. So I'm just using this as an example. Between these, as you're looking through the different varieties, if you have a short growing season, look for the shortest amount of days to maturity as possible, because this will help you get your food before the frosts come. Because that is so frustrating. I've had that happen many times when you put all this work into your garden, and the tomatoes are getting bigger and bigger, and they start to fruit, and they take a little bit longer in order to ripen, and it doesn't even seem like they're growing that long before the frost comes and kills them. So finding varieties that have the soonest maturity dates can really help make sure you're getting the most from it before the season ends. The next thing would be, say, these two seeds. If you're considering, a consideration for you is that you need to grow something in containers. Well, you see the little pot with the check mark there? That means this one is suitable for containers, whereas this one does not have a pot with a check mark. That means it's not suitable for containers. So if that's something that you need to consider, that's something that you would need to look for. The next thing would be 3 varieties of cucumbers here. Alright, this one is called Straight 8, and it says straight even for slices. This one is called Burpee Pickler Hybrid. It says early with heavy yields. And this one is Pickle Bush, prolific and space saving. So if your garden, if you had a really small amount of space, obviously something that says prolific and space saving would be a good option. If you are going for something more like to save your seeds, which this is almost a whole nother video on its own, I'm going to only have to touch on this really quickly so this doesn't end up too long. If you want to save the seeds, this one says hybrid. Hybrid seeds are not suitable for saving. I mean, you can, they'll grow, but they won't be like the mother plant. It'll be a completely different type variety. So if you're saving the seeds, this one would be the best one to leave out. And if it doesn't say hybrid, that means it's open pollinated, and that means it's safe to save. Oops. However, if you're not planning on saving the seeds, This one, the hybrid one, on the back says it's disease tolerant. So if you know that you tend to get diseases in the area where you live and your cucumbers, which cucumbers are, you know, usually tend to be the one thing in my garden that I fight diseases on probably the most, which is probably why I tried this one. Then a disease tolerant would be definitely another thing to look for. And then here is one more. This lettuce packet, it says that it's heat and cold tolerant. I know I live in an area where it gets real hot in the summer and it's pretty cold in the spring, and it seems like we don't have much time transition in between the two. It's cold and snowy. Like last year, 1 week before the official planting day here in the area where we live, we got tons of snow. You know, usually it's supposed to be warming up, but the weather can be so unpredictable. It can continue to be cold, and then not long after that it can really warm up and get hot all of a sudden. So a lettuce like this that can be heat or cold tolerant, or both like this, would be a really good variety to choose if you have, you know, issues like I do with the temperature extremes and things. So that's definitely something to look for if that's something you consider. So once you already have all of your seeds and you've already figured out your goals and you figured out where you're going to buy them all and everything, and once you've already gotten all your seeds, which I think the best time to actually buy your seeds is as early as possible. The longer they sit on the store shelves, the lower the germination rates are going to be, because they're kept at too warm of a temperature. They need to feel, I know this may sound strange, they need to be tricked almost into thinking that it's still winter. So the best place to store your seeds is actually in a colder spot than the store is able to provide for them. That's at a room temperature, and so the longer they sit on those shelves from January, they're already in the stores now. I mean, as soon as they clearance off the Christmas stuff, they move in the garden stuff. So I think the best time to buy seeds is actually, you know, as early as possible, say right now. And then when you get them, bring them home and put them in the fridge. But there's some debate between whether the fridge is the best place to put your seeds or the freezer. Personally, I feel like the fridge is the best bet, because if you're keeping your seeds for only a short amount of time, like say you buy a packet of seeds and you're going to use half of them 1 year and then the second half of the packet the next year after that, if you're only going to be storing them for a short amount of time, you know, a year or two, then the fridge is a really good place to keep them. They'll be tricked into thinking they're kept in a dormant, you know, state, and no damage will occur to them. However, if you're going to keep them for a long-term storage, you know, you want to keep your seeds for 5, 8, 10 or more years, then the best place to keep them would be the freezer. But the freezer can also damage seeds if the seeds aren't completely dry. And since there's no way to know, there's no way to really test them to know, to make sure that they're at a low enough, you know, moisture content, that's why I personally prefer the fridge, because, you know, there's no risk of, it's kind of like lettuce. Have you ever had your lettuce in your fridge freeze? Well, when it freezes, the cell walls break and then the lettuce turns into mush. The seeds will have the same kind of problem if they're not completely dry. You won't be able to tell by looking at the seeds, but if they're frozen and they weren't at the proper moisture content, the cell walls will break, the seed will be damaged, and then it won't germinate. So, again, if you want to keep them for long-term storage, really, really, really make sure that they are very, very, very dry before you put them in there, and then you can keep them in the freezer. Otherwise, if you're just keeping, you know, normal seeds, you're keeping them from last year's garden until this year's garden, or you bought some seeds and you're going to save them from 1 year to the next or whatever, then the fridge is a better bet. I personally like to keep them in glass containers. When they're in these paper envelopes, they can absorb moisture, and the two things that really make seeds go bad, well, three things actually, is moisture, sunlight, and the temperature. So that's why we're buying them nice and early, so that the temperature in them sitting on the store shelves doesn't reduce their germination rates. We're going to keep them in the fridge, which is actually a pretty dark place to keep them for the most part. And then we're going to keep them away from the moisture with glass containers. I just, you know, sort them all by type. I put them in little, any size really, any type of glass container. It doesn't have to be a mason jar, it can just be an emptied out spaghetti container or whatever. Anything you have will work. Repurposing, you know. And then this will keep the moisture out so that they won't end up with too much humidity and damage the seeds that way. So these will stay good in the fridge for, you know, at least a couple years, if not longer. Some seeds are a little bit, you know, better at that than others. The only ones that you're not going to want to put in the glass containers are things like peas and beans. These need to breathe, if you will. They need more air and air circulation in order for them to stay happy. So I store these separately. I put them all together, and then I put them in a paper bag to keep them away from the light, and I try to keep them away from any moisture as well. But don't put your peas and beans in the glass containers. So I think I've covered everything as far as how to buy them and where to store them once you've got them for the best results. So again, I'm Frugal Green Girl, and I hope you found this video helpful. Thanks for watching.